If you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do, all these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
What's up, guys, and welcome to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Cynthia. Happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope you all are doing great and having an amazing day. Things have been a little weird over here. And what I mean by over here, I mean in California. If you live in California, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Or if you're familiar with California, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, because we are going through a tremendous and terrible heat wave right now. We've been in this thing since over last weekend, and I feel like it has gone progressively worse. If you are not familiar with why this heat wave is terrible for California, it's because we are prone to fires here. And that's exactly what happened. There have about an hour and a half away from where I live here in the Sacramento area, fires broke out, and the skies right now are gray. It looks disgusting and gloomy, but it's hot, so hot outside. It doesn't make sense. And the sun is red, you guys, like bright red. It was so strange because I woke up last night. I was on my way to go teach a class in the evening. And I step out and I'm like, why is the sky completely gray? But it was like 6 p.m., but it was so hot and muggy and the sun was bright red. I actually took a picture of it because I was like, this is so strange. And at the time, I didn't know that a fire had broken out until someone pointed it out during my class. They are like, oh yeah, there fires happen in Napa area, which is really sad because they had just recovered from the terrible fires that broke out, I think, a couple years back, and it's happening again in that area. And it's just really sad, and terrible for the environment. And there's been ashes everywhere here. Like everyone's car, the street is covered in ashes from the fire. And it smells burnt. Like when you step out, it smells like something's burning. And it's just like a really somber mood. It's like, what is going on? We're in a pandemic. Fires are breaking out. It is incredibly hot. And it's just a really crazy times out here. I know as Californians, we complain a lot, but this is serious. I mean, there are fires breaking out. There was a freaking fire tornado that broke out in the Bay Area in Santa Cruz. I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even know fire tornadoes existed and were a type of natural disaster. Like, great. Great. A fire tornado is possible. So it's scary times over here, y'all. And I think there's a few fires also in Southern California, if I'm not mistaken. It's just California's burning up, man, literally. And it's really tragic and sad. So just, we got to help one another, y'all, in these tough times. There's a lot going on in the world. So that's kind of where my head's at, where my thoughts are this Wednesday evening. But let's discuss what we're here to discuss, and that is carb cycling. I'm curious if any of you have ever tried this or have heard of the term. I want to hear from you. Leave them in the comments. I want to see, what was your experience like? Did you like it? Is it a temporary thing? Would you continue to do it? Because honestly, I don't really know what carb cycling was until this episode. And I've heard of the term, I've heard of people carb cycling, but I've just never been that inclined to try it for myself. It's definitely intriguing, but I'm just not inclined to do it. I'm very into like intuitively eating and not being on like some type of schedule, you feel me? So carb cycling, that's what we're going to be talking about on today's episode. We're going to talk about what it is and how it works. Carbohydrate intake has been a hot topic for a very long time, you know, especially with the rise of keto and people eliminating carbs, which is absolutely crazy to me. Again, you don't need to eliminate carbs out of your diet to lose weight. But anyway, that's a different discussion for a different day. Several successful diets restrict carbs and some even totally exclude them. While no macronutrient is categorically bad, carb intake is something that should be tailored to the individual. In order to optimize carb intake, some people now cycle their carbohydrates, and this is known as carb cycling. And on today's episode, we're going to provide a detailed breakdown of the science and application of carb cycling. So what exactly is it? I know some of you may be left with a big question mark, like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of this term. Well, I'm about to tell you. Carb cycling is a dietary approach in which you alternate carb intake on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. It is commonly used to lose fat, maintain physical performance while dieting, or overcome a weight loss plateau. Some people adjust their carb intake day to day, while others may do longer periods of low, moderate, and high carb diets. In short, carb cycling aims to time carbohydrate intake to when it provides maximum benefit and exclude carbs when they're not needed. Pretty interesting, right? So it's all about timing. You can program your carb intake based on a variety of factors, including body composition goals. So some will reduce carbs during a diet, then add them back during a muscle building or performance phase. Training and rest days. One popular approach is a higher carb intake on training days and a lower carb intake on rest days. And I like unintentionally do this already, but I feel like I just don't really track that. Scheduled refeeds. Another popular approach is to do one or several days at a very high carb intake to act as a refeed during a prolonged diet. You can also program your carb intake based on special events or competitions. Athletes will often carb load prior to an event, and many physique competitors will do the same before a bodybuilding show or a photo shoot. You can also program your carb intake based on the type of training you're doing. Individuals will tailor carb intake depending on the intensity and duration of a particular training session. The longer or more intense the training is, the more carbs they will consume, and vice versa. Lastly, you can also tailor it based on body fat levels. Many individuals will cycle their carbohydrates based on their level of body fat. The leaner they become, the more high carb days or blocks they include. A typical weekly carb cycling diet may include 2 high carb days, 2 moderate carb days, and 3 low carb days. Protein intake is usually similar between days, whereas fat intake varies based on the carb intake. A high carb day normally means low fat, whereas the low carb days are high fat. Which makes sense, right? Carb cycling is an advanced diet strategy requiring more manipulation and programming than a typical diet. And I mean, the great thing about carb cycling is that there are a variety of ways that you can program this to tailor, to your fitness needs and health goals. And to be honest, prior to me really diving into this topic, I thought the only way to do it was basically to switch off every other day. So before researching about carb cycling, I thought it just entailed you basically eating high carbs for one day, then the next day you were very low carb, and then the following day high carb, and then so on, and you're just kind of switching off every other day. But come to find out, there are actually a number of ways you can program your carb intake, and it's based on a variety of factors, which I think is really great. So it's not very, cookie cutter. We all vary in our needs. We all want different things out of our health and fitness goals. So I definitely like that there's a number of ways you are able to carb cycle and be successful at it. So you guys, we're going to come to a very brief break right now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the science behind carb cycling. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all of the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
What's up, guys, and welcome to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. So we're now going to be diving into the science behind carb cycling. Carb cycling is a relatively new dietary approach. The science is primarily based on the biological mechanisms behind carbohydrate manipulation. There aren't many controlled studies directly investigating a carb cycling diet. Carb cycling tries to match the body's need for calories or glucose. For example, it provides carbohydrates around the workout or an intense training days. The high carb days are also in place to refuel muscle glycogen, which may improve performance and reduce muscle breakdown. Strategic high carb periods may also improve the function of the weight and appetite regulating hormones, leptin and ghrelin. The low-carb days are reported to switch the body over to a predominantly fat-based energy system, which may improve metabolic flexibility and the body's ability to burn fat as fuel in the long term. Another big component of carb cycling is the manipulation of insulin. The low-carb days and targeting of carbs around the workout may improve insulin sensitivity, a vital marker of health. In theory, this approach will maximize the benefits carbohydrates provide. Although the mechanisms behind carb cycling support its use, it should be interpreted with caution due to the lack of direct research on the approach. So the bottom line, you guys, the proposed mechanism of carb cycling is to maximize the benefits of carbohydrates and teach the body to burn fat as fuel. While this makes sense in theory, more direct research is needed. So, how can carb cycling help you lose weight? The mechanisms behind carb cycling suggest that it can be beneficial for weight loss. In theory, carb cycling may help you maintain physical performance while providing some of the same benefits as a low-carb diet. As with any diet, the main mechanism behind weight loss is a calorie deficit. You guys know I say this time and time again. This is not news for y'all, okay? Calorie deficit is the main mechanism behind weight loss, as in eating less than your body burns over a prolonged period of time. If a carb cycling diet is implemented alongside a calorie deficit, then you will likely lose weight. However, its more complex nature may cause adherence issues and confusion for beginners. In contrast, many people may enjoy the flexibility of carb cycling. This could probably improve adherence and long-term success for some people. So the bottom line, Carb cycling can help you lose weight as long as you maintain a calorie deficit. Eating plenty of protein can be useful as well, as it will help replenish your muscles and help them recover quickly. So let's dive into carb cycling for muscle growth and sports performance. Many people believe that carb cycling can be beneficial for muscle gain and physical performance. The regular high carb periods and targeted carb intake may help improve performance. Carbs around the workout may also aid with recovery, nutrient delivery, and glycogen replenishment. This may also promote muscle growth. However, some research suggests carbs are not needed to build muscle if protein intake is insufficient. While these mechanisms make sense in theory, direct research comparing carb cycling to other diets is needed to provide an evidence-based answer. So the bottom line, the mechanisms behind carb cycling suggest it can help you optimize performance. However, further research is required. So, does carb cycling have any other benefits? As already mentioned, you guys, carb cycling has the potential to provide some benefits that other diets cannot. By having periods of low and high carb, you may get many of the benefits provided by both diets without some of the negatives. Benefits of low carb periods may include better insulin sensitivity, increased fat burning, improved cholesterol, and enhanced metabolic health. High carb refeeds may also have positive effects on hormones during a diet, including thyroid hormones, testosterone, and leptin. These factors may play an important role in long-term dieting success, since hormones play a key role in hunger, metabolism, and exercise performance. So the bottom line, low carb periods may provide a number of health benefits, and high carb refeeds can have positive effects on your hormones. So again, here's how to do carb cycling, you guys. There are many variations to carb cycling, including daily alterations or longer periods of high and low carb cycles. So I'm about to tell you guys a sample week where you regulate your carb intake on a daily basis, which I think this is most familiar to most people. So for Monday, you are going to be doing weight training, right? Do some heavy lifting. You're going to want a high carb intake and a low fat intake. So the amount of carbs you're going to take for Monday are 200 grams. For the next day, Tuesday. Tuesday is a cardio day, aerobic exercise. So your carb intake is going to be moderate and your fat intake is going to be moderate as well. And the amount of carbs you eat for this day total are 100 grams. For Wednesday, it's a rest day. You're not working out, doing any type of activity. So your carb intake is low and your fat intake is high. So the total amount of carbs are 30 grams, which is pretty low. So very low carb intake for that day. Then we're back to Thursday. Thursday is a weight training day. Again, lifting weights. You're going to want to be on a high carb intake and a low fat intake. Total amount of carbs for that day are 200 grams. And then same exact thing for Friday. It's a weight training day, so high carb, low fat, 200 grams for the entire day of carbs. Then for Saturday and Sunday, they're both rest days. You're not doing any type of activity. So for those days, you're going to want to do low carb, high fat, and 30 grams for those days. So that kind of makes sense, right? So for days where you're lifting weights and you're really putting your body through a lot of stress, you're tearing those muscle fibers apart, you're going to want to be on high carb for that day to help replenish those muscles. And then for days where you're not active, it's a rest day, low carb since it's not needed. Makes complete sense, right? So even more so than a regular diet, carb cycling can take a lot of fine-tuning and adjustment along the way. It's going to take a lot of trial and error for you to really figure out how to correctly and effectively carb cycle. So experiment with the amount of high carb days per week, as well as the amount of carbs per day. Find the best approach for your lifestyle exercise routine, and goals. If you prefer a low-carb diet, you can add carb cycling occasionally in the form of a refeed. So here I'm about to tell you guys a sample of low-carb plans with occasional high-carb blocks as a refeed. So say from day 1 through 11, you're on a low-carb period. Very low-carb, day 1 through 11. Then you're on a high-carb period from days 12, 13, and 14. And in those high-carb periods, your carbs are going to be from 200 grams to 400 grams per day. Okay, so for those 3 days, you're very high-carb, again, as a refeed. Or if you're going by weeks and not necessarily per day. So say you're doing a low carb period for a month from weeks 1 through 4. And then you give yourself an entire week, week 5, high carb period. Those days you're going to want to consume anywhere from 150 grams to 400 grams per day of carbs. So that's an example of a refeed in terms of carb cycling. So as that sample suggests, you can either refeed every couple of weeks or do long periods such as a 4-week low carb phase with a 1-week refeed. You will also notice the amount of carbs per day can drastically vary, and this depends on activity level, muscle mass, and carbohydrate tolerance. An athlete who trains 3 hours a day or a 250-pound bodybuilder may need the upper limit or even more, whereas a normal individual may only need to refeed on 150 to 200 grams. So you may not even need to refeed all the way to 400 grams because that's a lot of carbs for a day. Finally, these examples, you guys, they're just suggestions only. You don't need to do them to a T. There is no proven formula or ratio for carb cycling. And again, you should tailor and experiment with it yourself. So again, the bottom line, there are several options for carb cycling ranging from daily changes to monthly refeeds. So just go ahead, experiment to figure out what works best for you and your goals. So you guys, that's going to wrap this segment. When we come back, more on carb cycling.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
What is up, you guys, and welcome back to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. So now I gave you guys, we talked about, I gave you a couple samples of how to carb cycle. So now I'm going to give you an example of a carb cycling menu. So I have here with me 3 sample meal plans for low, moderate, and high carb days, just so you can get get the wheels turning a little bit, spark an idea in you if you want to try this out. So this is how a high carb day would look like. For breakfast, you would have 3 boiled eggs, 3 slices of Ezekiel bread, tomatoes, mushroom, and a side bowl of mixed fruit. And that alone is about 60 grams of carbs. Then for lunch, you'd have 6 ounces of sweet potato, 6 ounces of lean meat or fish, and then mixed vegetables. And the lunch alone is 45 grams of carbs. Then as a pre-workout, you'd have 1 serving of oatmeal, almond milk, a cup of berries, and a scoop of whey protein. And that together is 50 grams of carbs. And then for dinner, you'd have 1 serving of wholemeal rice, 6 ounces of lean chicken, homemade tomato sauce, 1 serving of kidney beans, and mixed vegetables, 70 grams. So that's what a high carb day would look like. A moderate carb day, this is how it would look like. For breakfast, you would have grass-fed high protein yogurt, 1 cup of mixed berries, stevia, 1 spoon seed mix, and this is going to be about 25 grams of carbs for breakfast. Then for lunch, you'd have about 6 ounces of chicken salad with 4 ounces of diced potatoes. And that is going to be about 25 grams of carbs alone. For pre-workout, you'd have 1 banana with whey protein. And that's going to be 30 grams of carbs. And lastly, for dinner, 1 serving of sweet potato fries, 6 ounces of lean beef, homemade tomato sauce, 1 serving of kidney beans, and mixed vegetables. And this together is going to be 40 grams of carbs. And then a low carb day, so that was for a moderate carb day. On a low carb day, this is what it would look like. For breakfast, you'd have 3 eggs with 3 slices of bacon and mixed vegetables, around 10 grams of carbs. For lunch, you'd have 6 ounces salmon salad with 1 spoon olive oil, 10 grams of carbs as well. As a snack, you'd have 1 ounce of mixed nuts with 1 serving of turkey slices, 10 grams of carbs. And then lastly, for dinner, you'd have 6 ounces steak, half an avocado, and mixed vegetables. And this is 16 grams of carbs. So that is, again, 3 different days: high carb meal, moderate carb, or high carb day, moderate carb day, and then low carb day. Now I'm going to tell you guys some recommended carbohydrate food sources, because we obviously know there are good and bad carbs. So we want to make sure we're sticking majority of the time to the good ones. Some carbohydrates should be avoided except on special occasions or, for the occasional cheat meal. In contrast, there are plenty of healthy carb sources that are tasty and packed full of beneficial fiber, vitamins, and minerals. When planning your high carb days, do not use it as an excuse for an all-out Pop-Tart binge, okay? Oh my God, now that I'm saying that, it's like, Pop-Tarts. Doesn't it sound so good right now? Maybe because I'm hungry. Instead, focus on these healthier carb choices. So here are some recommended carbs that would be good for you guys. So for whole grains, you're gonna want unmodified grains, and that are perfectly healthy and linked with many health benefits. And sources include brown rice, oats, and quinoa. Next, we have our vegetables. Every vegetable has a different vitamin and mineral content. So I would suggest eat a variety of colors to get a good balance. Then unprocessed fruits. As with vegetables, every fruit is unique, especially berries with their high antioxidant content and low glycemic load. So again, add a variety into your palate. Next, we have legumes. A great choice of slow digesting carbohydrates, which are full of fiber and minerals. Just make sure you prepare them properly. And then lastly, potatoes, sweet potatoes, butternut squash. Those are also really good sources of carbs. So bottom line, you guys, for the high carb days, those are not an excuse to binge on junk food. Instead, eat mostly healthy whole food sources of carbs. So to sum everything up, carb cycling may be a useful tool for those trying to optimize their diet, physical performance, and health. The individual mechanisms behind carb cycling are supported by research. However, no direct research has investigated a long-term carb cycling diet. Rather than chronic low or high carb diets, A balance between the two may be beneficial from both a physiological and psychological perspective. If using carb cycling for fat loss, you guys, ensure that your protein intake is on point and is adequate and you maintain a calorie deficit. And lastly, just remember to always experiment with the protocol and amount of carbohydrates to find the best fit for you, okay? There's no cookie cutter way, to doing this thing. Like I mentioned, there are a number of ways you guys are able to, carb cycle, and it doesn't need to be every other day. You can do it for even longer, prolonged times. So that's the great thing about it. So just remember, there's no formal definition for carb cycling, but the basic principle is that you alter your carb intake based on your varying needs throughout the week, month, or year. The timing and amount of carbs consumed during each phase vary depending on the person. Carb cycling is often used among bodybuilders, physique competitors, and high-performing athletes. But with the recent rise in popularity of the ketogenic diet, particularly for active people, the concept of carb cycling is becoming more common among everyday athletes. Generally, carb cycling revolves around a person's training schedule. On days when they are training more intensely, they would consume more carbohydrates, whereas low-carb days would occur on days when their training is less intense. There are usually several high-carb, medium carb, and low carb days cycled throughout the week. So why do it? The rationale behind carb cycling is that when your body receives limited carbs, it relies on fat as the primary fuel source, which can be helpful for weight management, body fat losses, and boosting carb storage when carbs are reintroduced. The idea is that by being strategic about when and how you eat carbs, your body's preferred fuel source for exercise, by the way, you can more efficiently power your workouts and achieve better results in terms of both performance and body composition. So, with that being said, who is carb cycling right for? We're going to dive into that question right after this commercial break.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
What's up, you guys, and welcome back to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. So right before we went on break, I left you guys with a cliffhanger, right? Who is carb cycling right for? Who is a good candidate to do this? There are two main groups of people that carb cycling can be helpful for. And these two groups are endurance athletes and active people on low-carb diets. For those who focus on endurance sports like running, cycling, and swimming, preliminary evidence suggests that varying carbohydrate throughout the year, specifically lowering carbs during high volume pre-season training, may be helpful for increasing muscle glycogen stores and performance when carbs are reintroduced. Basically, lowering your carb intake before you go into your main training session, say prepping for a marathon or a triathlon, may help your body to better utilize carbs when you introduce them right before you need to hit your peak performance level. For those more interested in weight control or fat loss, carb cycling can also make sense. For some individuals, consuming a lower carb diet can be helpful for weight management, weight maintenance, and optimal health. That's probably why keto is so popular at the moment. That said, research indicates that carbohydrates are the predominant fuel for working muscles during high-intensity exercise, and consuming carbs before and after a tough sweat session is critical to get the most out of it. It's generally accepted that a low-carb intake will reduce power output during high-intensity exercise. So carb cycling could help if you're eating a low-carb diet but want to complete a HIIT or weightlifting workout, for example. And while carb cycling is popular with those who follow keto-like, high-fat, low-carb diets, you don't have to be eating a high-fat diet to benefit from carb cycling. You can absolutely cycle your carbs with any kind of diet. That's the great thing about it. In fact, it might be better not to carb cycle while on keto, especially if you're newer to the eating style. Regular increases in carbs will take you out of ketosis. So if you decide to use carb cycling with a ketogenic diet, I would limit high carb days to only once, maybe twice per week. After all, the point of keto is to get your body to use fat for fuel. So taking your body in and out of ketosis kind of defeats the purpose of the diet and might even make it hard to gauge whether the eating style is a good fit for you or not. So does it work? So this all sounds great in theory, right? But what does science have to say about it? And unfortunately, not much. Research on carb cycling for endurance performance is relatively new, and there's not a lot of data on the long-term effects of swinging between low and high carb intake. The same goes for the potential fat loss benefits. The evidence around carb cycling is mainly anecdotal. The fact that the long-term effects of carb cycling are unknown is one of the reasons experts recommend trying it for short periods of time only. Plus, there's the fact that it takes a lot of planning, prepping, and tracking to do it successfully. It can be difficult to sustain long term. Physique competitors and athletes usually only use it during the prep phase for competitions, which is usually only a few weeks or months. And while it might give you more energy on training days, it can also be mentally draining. As with any type of diet, you never want to become obsessed with counting, whether it's calories, macros, or something else, because it can promote a very unhealthy mindset and relationship with food. And that's not what we want, right? That's not what we're trying to promote. Also, individuals tend to consume the same foods when carb cycling, therefore limiting variety within their diet. And we want variety in our diet. Why? Because we want to kind of hit the different vitamins. We want to intake the different minerals of these different foods. So here are my final carb cycling tips. Number 1 is that fiber matters. Prioritizing high fiber carbs on low carb days is a solid way to go. With any lower carb eating approach, getting adequate fiber is a concern, as whole grain carbohydrates are a rich source of this important nutrient. Fiber supports satiety, cholesterol control, and your microbiome, among other things. And did you guys know that the microbiome of your gut is linked to the brain and mental illness? Second, quality matters. High carb days shouldn't be filled with pizza and French fries. Whole grains such as brown rice, quinoa, and whole grain bread pasta are healthier choices than more refined options such as sugar, cakes, cookies, and soft drinks. And when in doubt, you guys, consult with an expert. The amount of carbohydrates required on high versus low carb days varies greatly depending on calorie needs, the type and amount of activity you do, and your goal. If you want personalized recommendations, check in with a registered dietitian. That way you can ensure you're getting the fuel your body needs to achieve the best possible results. So, you guys, that's going to wrap up today's episode here at the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast. I really hope you guys enjoy today's talk of carb cycling. Again, if you have tried this before, please let me know, what are your thoughts? What's your program like? How do you tailor your carb cycling program? Do you do it every other day? Do you do it for prolonged periods of time? Do you do it just for, when you're prepping? Let me know in the comments because I would love to know. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you liked today's episode, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff because that tremendously helps the show. And I'll catch you guys here for the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.